All right, so now let's see this particular question. So over here we are given an integer array, right? And each number in this particular array represents a vote to a candidate, right? We need to return the candidates that have got votes greater than 1/3 of the total votes, right? And if there is not a majority vote, we just need to return an empty array, right? So basically, if there is no such candidate who has got more than n by 3 number of votes, where n is the size of the total array, then we just have to return an empty array. Otherwise, we have to return an array consisting of all such candidates who have got more than 1/3 of the total votes, right? So essentially what we need to do is, given an input array, we need to find those elements that occur more than n by 3 number of times in that particular array, where n is the size of the total array, right? That's what we need to do. So if in this example, if you see, the input array is this, right? And my output is 5, 6. Why? Because 5, if you see, it appears 4 number of times, and 6 appears 5 times, right? And the total size of this particular array is actually 5 plus 4 plus 2, that is 11, right? And now if I do 11 by 3, it will come out to be 3, right? As per the integer division, right? So any element which occurs more than 3 times in this particular array will be a valid candidate to be returned as an output, right? So that's the entire question. Now maybe you can just pause this video and try to think of a solution. And once you are done, you can just come back and check the solution here. Okay, so now to solve this particular question, first of all, I would recommend you, and I would highly recommend you to actually go and watch another question that I have, posted earlier. It is called the majority element and not the majority element 2 over here. So basically, in that particular question, we were supposed to find, one element in the given input array which occurs more than n by 2 number of times in that array, where n is again the size of the total array, right? So that was the question, and we used a popular algorithm over there called as the Boyer-Murray majority voting algorithm, or for short, Murray voting algorithm, right? And we are just going to use the same algorithm, but we are going to extend that particular algorithm over here, because over here we don't have to find one element which occurs more than n by 2 times, but we have to find, all those elements which occur more than n by 3 times in this particular array, right? So that's something that we will use. But before even using that particular algorithm, we need to have an important observation over here. And that observation is that, there can be only two such elements which can occur more than n by 3 times in a given array, right? There cannot be, more than two elements which can occur more than n by 3 times in this particular array or in any array as such, right? There can be only two elements, right? So now to implement Murray voting algorithm to find these two, majority elements which occur more than n by 3 times in this array, what we can do is we can have, first of all, two variables over here. Let me just put it like this. Yeah. So the first variable will be num1. I will just initialize it to -1, right? And also I will have another variable num2, right? And I will initialize both of them to -1, right? And then what I will do is I will have two more variables like this, v1 and v2, right? And I will initialize both of them to 0. So now if you remember in the earlier question, where we were supposed to find only one majority element which occurs more than n by 2 times in the entire array, we were using one variable called num and then the other variable to count the vote of that particular num, and that was v, right? So simply we were using two variables over here, right? But now since we are supposed to find two majority elements which occur more than n by 3 times in this array, we are using two num variables and two vote variables to track the corresponding votes of each of the element that is stored in these num variables, right? So that's what we are doing over here. Now what I will do is I will essentially do the same thing, right? There will be only a little difference which you will get to know, but essentially I will start doing the same thing. What I will do is, let me actually put them in a different line so that I can keep updating them, right? Like this. So now what I will do is I will just traverse this entire array, right? And now when I'm at the first position, I will compare if my current element is equal to the current value of num1 or not, right? So it is not equal, right? So now what I will do is now I will compare if my current element of the array is equal to num2 or not. Again, it is not equal, right? So now what I will do is I will check if my v1, that is the vote count for num1 is equal to 0, right? And uh, indeed it is equal to 0, right? So now what I will do is I will just reinitialize my num1 to the current element, and so my num1 will now become 2, right? And also I will just increment my vote count for num1 by 1. So now it will become 1, right? Now I will move to the next element, right? Again, I will do the same thing. I will check if my current element is equal to num1. It is not. Then I will check if my current element is equal to num2. Again, it is not, right? Now I will check if my v1 is equal to 0. It is not. Then I will check if my v2 is equal to 0. Yes, and indeed it is equal to 0. So now what I will do is I will reinitialize my num2 to 1, right? And also increment my vote count by 1 so that it becomes 1 now, right? And now I will move to the next element, right? Now again I will check if my num1 is equal to 5. It is not. Is num2 equal to 5? It is not. Is my v1 equal to 0? Again it is not. Is v2 equal to 0? That is also not true, right? So none of the conditions got satisfied. That means I got a different number which is neither equal to num1 nor it is equal to num2, right? So that means I will have to cancel out 1 vote for both of them, right? For both of the num1 and num2, right? So I will just decrement v1 by 1 to make it 0, and also decrement v2 by 1. So now it becomes 0, right? Now what I will do is again I will move to the next element, right? Now again I will check if my num1 is equal to 5. It is not. Num2 is equal to 5. No. Is my v1 equal to 0? And now actually this is true. My v1 is equal to 0. So now what I will do is I will reinitialize my num1 to 5, right? And I will also increment my vote count for num1 by 1, right? Now what I will do is again I will move to the next element. Now I will check if my num1 is equal to 5. Yes, it is equal to 5. So now I will just increment my vote count for num1 by 1 to make it 2 now, right? Now again I will move to the next element. Again I will check if num1 equal to 5. Yes, it is. So again I will just increment the vote count by 1, and now it will become 3, right? Now when I move to the next element I get 6. So 6 is not equal to the num1. So now I will check if my num2 is equal to 6. That is also not equal, right? Then I will check if my v1 is equal to 0. No, it is not equal, right? Then I will check if my v2 is equal to 0, and yes, it is equal to 0. So now what I will do is I will just reinitialize my num2 to 6, right? Like this. And also I will just increment my vote count by 1, right? Now I will again move to the next element. I will check if num1 equal to 6. No. Num2 equal to 6. Yes. So I will just increment the vote count for num2 by 1, right? Again, I will move to the next 6. Check if num1 equal to 6. No. Is num2 equal to 6? Yes. Again, increment the vote count by 1, right? Then I will move to the next element. Again, check num1 equal to 6. No. Num2 equal to 6. Yes. Increment the vote count by 1, right? And finally, again, when I'm at the last element, I will check num1 equal to 6. No. Is num2 equal to 6? Yes, it is. So again, I will just increment the vote count by 1, and now it will become 5, right? Now, once I've traversed the entire array, once I've exhausted all the elements by doing this process, whichever num got more than 0 votes, right, at the end of the entire traversal, they will be, valid candidates to be my majority element, which appears more than n by 3 times in this particular array, right? If none of them got like both v1 and v2 are equal to 0, then there is no majority element. There is no element that occurs more than n by 3 times in this particular array, and so I can just return an empty array. If only one element is having count greater than n by 3, then I will just output that particular number in my final output array. So that's what I have to do entirely, right? Now again, talking about the time and the space complexity over here. So time complexity will be linear again, because see, I'm just traversing this particular array linearly once, right? And then also I'm just checking if finally the numbers that I got as eligible or valid candidates for being majority element, if they really are majority elements or not. So for doing that also, I will need another traversal. So basically I'm doing the traversal of this particular array twice. So again, the time complexity will be order of n, right? And since I'm not using any extra space apart from these 4 variables, the space complexity will be constant, that is order of 1, right? So that is the entire algorithm. Now maybe what we can do is we can just switch to our IDE and write a solution for this. All right, so now let's implement the solution that we discussed, right? First of all, let me just declare a function. I will call it as find majority maybe, right? And this will again accept an array, integer array. Now to start with, I will just capture the length of this particular array in variable n, right? And now what I will do is I will declare two variables num1 and num2 and make it equal to -1, right? And then what I will do is I will initialize my v1 and v2 to 0, right? That's what we discussed initially. Now what I will do is I will just traverse the entire array, entire length of the array like this, right? And then what I will do is at every element, I will keep checking if my current element is equal to num1 or not, right? If it is equal, then I will just increment my v1 variable by 1, right? Else if it is my current element is actually equal to num2, right? Then what I will do is I will just increment my v2 variable, that is vote count for num2 by 1, right? Then what I will do is if none of these conditions are true, that is my current element is neither equal to num1 nor it is equal to num2, then what I will check is if my vote count, that is v1, is equal to 0 or not, right? If it is equal to 0, then again what I will do is I will just reinitialize my num1 variable to the current element, right? Like this. And I will just increment my vote count by 1 to make it 1, right? Otherwise, what I will check again is if my v2 is equal to 0 now, right? Then what I will do is I will just reinitialize my num2 equal to the current element, right? And increment the v2 variable by 1, right? If none of these conditions are true, that is not even my vote 1 and vote 2 are equal to 0, both of them are greater than 0, then what I will do is I will simply decrement the votes for both the elements, both the num1 and num2 by 1, right? Because the votes for both these num1 and num2 will get cancelled because I saw a different number, right? So now I will just decrement both v1 and v2 by 1 like this, right? And now I will just keep doing this for the entire length of the array, right? That's what we are saying. And once I've traversed the entire length of the array, I will just come out of this for loop over here. And now what I will do is I will just, now I need to count basically the number of occurrences of both num1 and num2 in the given input array, right? And whichever, for whichever either num1 or num2 or both of them, if the count of occurrences is greater than n by 3, then I will be able to call them as my majority element, otherwise not, right? So what I will do is since I have to track the count of two variables, two numbers over here, I can just use a hash map over here, right? And what I will do is I will make key 1 as num1 and value of this particular key will be the count of num1, right? Which I will keep incrementing as and when I'm seeing this particular number in my array, right? And the second key would be num2, which also for which I will just give the value as 0, which is the count of num2 that I've seen, right? And then I will just declare an empty array which will hold the output finally that I have to return. And now what I will do is I will just traverse this entire array, right? Like this. And now I will check if array of I, whatever is the current element, is in hash or not, right? If it is in hash, then what I will do is, then that would mean essentially that the current element is one of the num1 or num2, right? So now what I will do is I will just increment the count of this current element in my hash map by 1, like this, right? Now what I will do is I will just keep doing this for the entire length of the array. If at all I find, this the current element one among num1 or num2, I will just keep incrementing its count over here in the hash map. And finally, once I'm done with the entire for loop, I will just come out and now I will check if first of all, the count of my num1 is greater than n by 3 or not, right? If it is greater than n by 3, then I will just include it in my output array, right? I will just append it in my output array like this, right? Num1. And then I will do the same thing for num2 as well, like this, right? I will check the count of the num2 if it is greater than n by 3 or not. If it is, then I will just append num2 also in my result array. And finally, I will just return the result array like this, right? Return res. And also, if you remember in the question, it is given that we have to sort the result array and then return it. So I will just sort it over here like this before returning, and then return the final output, right? Solution by taking the same example that we saw in the explanation of the video. So I will just copy that example maybe from here quickly, like this, right? And now what I can do is I can print the output of this particular function by calling it on this particular array, right? And I should get 5 and 6 as my output, right? So let's see, let's run it. And if you see, I get an array of 5 and 6, right? And that is the correct output. So this is the solution entirely of this particular question. I hope you understood it well. And now I will see you in the next video. Thank you.